I'm often at pains to remind people that the big boom in the production of rune stones and other rune inscribed objects really actually comes after the introduction of Christianity to the majority of people in Scandinavia. We have this kind of, internet enthusiast endorsed and perpetuated notion that rune stones and runic inscribed things all have like really rock and roll awesome inscriptions. Most of them don't. Most of them, even where they don't have some explicitly Christian element, are basically just kind of pedestrian and say, so-and-so carved this after so-and-so died. But today I want to talk to you about some inscriptions that actually have rock and roll, mysterious meanings. What I want to kind of focus around particularly are some amulets with apparent healing purposes. Now, let me first draw your attention to the Kvineby amulet. This amulet, dating from the 1000s, I would think, early mid-ish 1000s, comes from Kvineby in Sweden. And it is a little 2-inch square of copper with a fish carved into it, just a little picture of a fish, and a small hole drilled through it for wearing, probably like around the neck. And it looks like the hole might have been made after the inscription was carved. And then we have an inscription that's very mysterious. So I'm going to read you how I see it. It gets easier to read with every line. The first line is incredibly difficult to read. The last couple lines are very easy to understand. Part of this is that the first line has a lot of bind runes, and when you deal with bind runes, which is 2 runes or more written together as one symbol, it's always a little hard to tell which direction you're supposed to read it in, right? So if we look at an HB, or Hagal Bjarkan bind rune, which is of course the symbol for Bluetooth, because HB is the initials of King Harald Bluetooth, you wouldn't actually necessarily know whether to read the H or the B first. So there's some confusion from that, and also the vocabulary in the first line is much debated. For the most part, I think that the best interpretation is by Jonna Louis Jensen. I don't 100% agree with her interpretations, but she really revolutionized our understanding of this inscription. So what we've probably got here is, and by the way, we're starting on one side with a line that's upside down and backwards, then going up through a line that's normally oriented, then another line that's upside down and backwards, another line that's normally oriented, another line that's upside down and backwards, flipping it, having a line that's upside down and backwards, then a line that's normally oriented, another line that's upside down and backwards, and a final line that's normally oriented. So it's a weird variation of what in studies of ancient writing is called bistrophodon, where you alternate the direction of writing between different lines in an inscription. And it's actually mostly associated with very ancient inscriptions, not something from the late Viking Age like this. All right, so what have we got? Potentially something like this. Her I, and the first rune in this line is completely unreadable, so maybe if we could read it, this would change. But probably sound like herein, her I. Yrki, I compose. Now this is all made up out of bind runes in the original, which I really can't show you with my Unicode runes here. Louis Jensen thinks this is Kuri, I cower or I hide instead of I compose. I just think Yrki is a little bit more of a normal vocabulary item, and the poetic context is pretty safe, so I'm going to say Yrki. So herein I compose a poem. Imps undir Guði, so under God of soot. Now, what's going on here? First of all, you may think that soot is an odd word to see in a runic inscription, but in fact, it is a word well tested from runic inscriptions. Why is it the god of soot? Hard to say, but as we read through this inscription, we'll see that it obviously is supposed to have some kind of curative power, and ashes and soot were considered to have curative powers often in the Middle Ages. So potentially the herein part and then this under god of soot. Hard to say why it's under the god of soot rather than just under soot, but the person reciting the spell is potentially covered in soot, right? So herein, within the soot, under a god of soot, I compose the following poem. Then we have an R that I don't really know what to do with. And then Berk, I carry. So the word I, ek, being affixed as just the K. Boovie, this is the name of the person apparently speaking the incantation here. Mer fult I hud. So I, Boovie, carry a foulness inside my skin. I hud mer. Now, is this actually then a skin condition, right? Is it some kind of rash? Erysipelas is a strong possibility, particularly with another clue I'm about to review. Or is it something internal, right? Deep under my skin, in my skin. Hard to say. Ester vis, which is known to you, which is certain to you. So he's addressing someone who knows this. In bra. In bra potentially is the bright one. This is potentially the one who's being addressed here. However, bror, bright, is really only known from place names, like Brol, Valir, bright plains, bright valleys. So difficult to know if this is how to read this. Then the vowel is shared with the next word, halt. Now, H's are often left out in runic inscriptions, particularly Swedish runic inscriptions. So we can pretty confidently read this as, and I think it was actually Louis Jensen who originally proposed this, halt ilu från buva. Hold evil away from Boovie. So now we're addressing maybe not the same being that was addressed before, but some other beings being called on to protect this person speaking at Boovie from some kind of ill, some kind of bad. Thor geti hans, mider them hamri es omhir. May Thor watch over, guard over him with the hammer which knocked or struck Now, this name occurs in the next line too. This is a word for dark or dim. It's a pretty obscure part of mostly Old Norse poetic vocabulary. We do see that it has pretty evil associations, though. So, for example, the island, or the lake, which has the island, which the monstrous wolf Fenrir is imprisoned till Ragnarok, is called Svartnir, like dim emblackener, right? So it's a place that's apparently very dark. And then Louis Jensen points out also that in modern Icelandic, Alma, of course is how it's pronounced now, derived from the same root, is a term for erysipelas, a strep infection of the skin, right? And Boovie has alluded to some skin problems, so possibly that's exactly what we're talking about. Now, and by the way, she also points out that large caterpillars held to cause skin infections in Norway were called Olma. All right, so also from this root. So potentially there's a lot to point to this being interpreted as some kind of evil being causing some kind of skin infection, which of course once were much more common. Why exactly Thor, mightiest of gods, protector of the realms of gods and humans alike, would be called on to help with a skin infection may seem kind of minor to us, but people pray to God to help them with their football games. So, if Thor can strike down, Hrungnir, presumably he can strike down this, perhaps worm-like being causing a skin infection. Now, Hav Eka Om. So, you have the affliction, the Eki. Flee från illvat, fly away, evil being. Fer Eki av buva. The affliction goes away from Boovie. And then we have the most rock and roll part of this, the last part, which is the clearest, easiest to read. Góð eru undir honum och yfir honum. Gods are under him and over him. So there's certainly a lot here that's kind of mysterious. And again, it's really Louis Jensen in her work about 15, 20 years ago who cleared up what a lot of this means, or probably means, but this still doesn't mean that we can entirely figure it out. Now I'm going to give you a quick word from my sponsor, and then I'll come back and look at a couple other runic inscriptions or writings that have similar pretty rock and roll content. Now, the Kvineby amulet has very similar contents to a runic charm found written in the margins of an Old English manuscript that was finished in 1073. Now, this runic charm is actually in Old Norse, not in Old English. So, and the content of the manuscript has nothing to do with runes or magic or anything else. So, very difficult to know why this is there. Maybe just kind of a doodle by the person writing the manuscript. But it says, Gurir sorfara farthu nu, fundin estu, Thor vigithik, Thorsa drotin, Guril sorfara, vidar adra fori. Now here I'm following much the interpretation of John McKenna, Rudy Zemek et al. And so they read Guriel, which is once spelled with the K rune and once with the I rune, once with K and once with Is, so it's probably a G. This meant by that first letter, as being from Guria, which is smear with gore. So this is like gore smearer, maybe, something like that. The wound stick, or we can say wound causer, based on other ways that Thvara word is used. So gore smearer, wound causer. Either this is the name of some being that's being addressed, or a description for some malevolent being addressed. Go now, Farthunu. You are found, Fundin Estu. Now, one hint that this is Old East Norse is that est form for you are. Now, in Old West Norse, Old Icelandic, Old Norwegian, the forms of Old Norse that we actually mostly read, you are is through ert, but there are dialects of Old East Norse that have through est. That is not an earlier form of ert, it's a separate dialectal development, as I demonstrated in my first published paper. May Thor bless you. Now, presumably he's not talking to the being here, he's talking to the person affected by whatever. So Thor bless you, Thor vigithik, Lord of anti-gods, the so-called giants, Thors Jotun. Now he's presumably addressing the monster, the Guriel. This particular title is given to Thrimr, the being that steals Thor's hammer in the poem Thrymskvida in the Poetic Edda. Presumably we're not talking to that grand being, but rather this kind of exaggeratedly awesome title is being applied to some kind of more minor monster of mischief and sickness. Gore smear, wound causer, against vain danger. And the really critical reading here is reading that Ur or U rune as an F, which is plausible at this point, the 1070s. That's a suggestion of McKinnell, Zemek et al. So Adrafori, vain danger then. My translation there is different from theirs. They translate that last A as short, but I think with a long A making it vain danger is a pretty clear meaning. So this looks like we're talking to some kind of evil minor being, calling on Thor to help us, to help with some kind of vain problem, right? Who knows exactly what that vain problem or vain danger is. But then we have something very similar once again in another one of these rectangular copper little amulets. This one is kind of ticket shaped. For those of you who are younger than 30, a ticket was a paper thing you showed to get into things. This reads, and this is from Sigtuna, Sweden. Thor sorridu, Thorsa drotin, flithu nu, fundenes, av their thrior thror ulv, av their niu nöðir ulver, thrir isir, this isir aukis unir ulver, njot livia. Thor, swing at the wound, sor ridu. Now that's my interpretation. I haven't seen anybody else give. It's true that sor rida, sor ridu can be found in other inscriptions, and there seems to actually be applying to the monster. So it could possibly be some kind of address to, you know, the wound rider or something like that. But why is it then why the U is hard to explain. I think if we see this uniquely as an imperative, ridu, strike, of course it means ride, but it can mean strike, swing at the wound, right? We're invoking Thor to help us. So Thor, swing at the wound. And we have Thorsadroshan, Lord of Anti-Gods, Lord of Jotnar, or Thorsar again. Flee now, again. Funden es, you are found, or actually it is found. He is found. Maybe we're addressing it in the third person now. For you, 3 longings. Now, one might be cursed with longings in Old Norse literature, for example, in For Skirnir. Skirnir curses Gerther, the woman that he's wooing for Freyr, with longing. Wolf. I guess this thing is a wolf. Monsters are often called wolves, whether or not they're wolves. The Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, is addressed as a wolf, or mentioned as a wolf in Völuspá, for example. For you, 9 emergencies. Nadir, wolf. 3 ices. And then it's kind of hard to figure out what's going on here. Maybe something like, these ices worked increase what? I can't make much grammatical sense of this. And then again, wolf. And then profit from the healing herbs. Njot, Livia. Now, clearly, these 3 charms with their healing content come from a fundamentally pagan worldview. But it's not a worldview that's completely alien to the Christian Middle Ages either, where, minor supernatural beings are held to be causing all manner of sicknesses and infections, right? It's not, it would be kind of a misunderstanding to attribute some particular extra superstition to the pagan Norse about this stuff. But I'd also point out to you that it's not impossible that these inscriptions, being as late as they are from the 1000s, are actually made by Christians, right? Or, if not by Christians, by people who accept Christ as a powerful deity. Note that fish on the Kvineby amulet. It's not impossible that's meant to be the fish that's symbolic of Christ, right? Now today, when we see the fish as a symbol of Christ, it's typically just that little magnet people put on their cars. And it's not much seen outside of that. Sometimes you see it in the phone book for businesses saying they're owned by Christians. But the fish used to be a really prominent symbol of Christianity in ancient medieval times. I don't think it's impossible that the fish on the Kvineby amulet is one little extra deity that's being called on for help, right? Thor's being summoned for help, but hey, if Christ can help too, I'm going to carve his symbol right there. So in a world where, pagans are not as exclusive about the gods they'll pray to as Christians and other monotheists are, I could see late pagans calling on Christ just to kind of magnify the power of their prayers. And I could see early Christians who don't really understand the tenets of formal Christianity still seeking out help from pagan gods, being, they might think of them as more like pagan spirits now, against minor demons of sickness. Also assisting in the possibility of that being what's going on here, let's not forget that in the Borgund Stave Church in Norway, right around 1200, 200 years after the country was converted to Christianity, someone named Thorir carved this. Thorir reist Runar Thessar, than Olaus o Apthan, han for herum. Bæði gerðu Nornir vel og illa, mikla möði skapaðu þær mer. Thorir carved these runes on the Olaus evening when he traveled around here. The Norns made both good and evil. They created much weariness for me. That's a pretty rock and roll kind of inscription, right? I mean, I could even see somebody getting a tattoo or putting that on a tombstone who meant it in a very pagan way. But 200 years later, someone is still thinking, at least sort of literarily, in very familiar pagan terms. So we just need to remember that people are not as, certainly pagans, and again, sort of pre-dogmatic Christians, if you will, in the Middle Ages, are not necessarily as exclusive about these pagan Christian lines as enthusiasts might be today. All right, well, I hope that's been a cool look at some neat inscriptions for you. And for now, from Dusty, Wyoming, I'm wishing you all the best.